I've always said, and I'm stealing Benjamin Franklin quote and taking it and making it my own, an ounce of preparation is worth a pound of cure. And so I think it's the impact of the shell requirements from the GSA and the operating costs of the agency's equipment and facilities. So unlike most private commercial real estate transactions, the government defines basically what their base condition is. Your building is not ready for us to accept unless you deliver what we call in our industry a warm white shell. And the section 3 of the lease talks about that warm white shell. I would say, probably 80% of landlords think they know what that is and they think their building meets it. And in reality, it doesn't, because the way it's written is cumbersome, it's confusing. And if you don't fully understand that while you're making your offers, you're putting yourself in a position to fail. The next misunderstood aspect is the idea that your traditional team you've always used in your office building can handle a GSA project if they've never handled, and if they've never handled one, they just can't. So I see it all the time where I've got the landlord, that the landlord always uses the same architect. They always use one of two GCs, and the architects always say, oh yeah, I know how to do it. And I go, okay, so tell me about the DIDs. And they say, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not the same. It's a traditional tenant delivery process is a test fit, space plan, pricing plan. When you get into that pricing plan area, you start to cost it. You figure out if it's going to be a tenant improvement allowance or a landlord turnkey project. You put that into the lease. Then you get into CDs and you move forward. And it's clear if you do your project right, if changers come up, whose fault they are, and any deviations from that pricing plan get picked up. That's the process everyone does. But in this process, the GSA process, there is no space plan. There is no pricing plan. There is the DIDs, and that is the design intent drawings. And it is 6 pages, typically, the way it's outlined in the lease. And it's really hard to capture entire scope in 6 pages. And so thinking that your team, that your landlord architecture team that you always use can do that and understand that, that's difficult and likely a mistake. And the next one is thinking that your GC can handle it. I know Brian says this all the time. His question that he knows is going to be the bell cow. It's going to be, can you tell me about how you've done a TIX? And if they can't answer that question, they're just not suited to be able to be your GC on a project. And that the negotiation period through that TIX table can make or break a project. I think what's really hard for landlords to understand is the way that the government looks at their rents and their buckets of money to pull from. Chad and Brian can definitely explain this better than I. Basically, you have a shell rent, then you have a tenant improvement rent that's also mixed in with BSAC, building security amortization costs, right, Brian?
Building specific? Yeah.
Building specific. And then you have operating rent and the costs are associated with that. And then the allowances of the costs that they can build from are in the TI and BSAC tenant improvement allowance. You have to be very specific and detail oriented about how you draw these things, how you price these things, how you charge rent. And that's really where when we talk about kind of the pre-award and the lease offerings phase and the post-award, you have to understand when you're making your offer how your building fits those requirements and how you're going to build a competitive offer, yet a lucrative offer that's not going to make you go bankrupt. Then, because you're going to be held accountable to that offer and that lease when it comes time to build it post-award. So you better know that you did the right things up front, and you better know how that process works when you're on the back end.
Matt, just to kind of add to that, the upfront piece is frequently the mixed piece. I guess a good way that I think about it is like familiarity is not specialization. So frequently, Chad and I will run into folks who say, yeah, I've done 2 GSA deals in the last 5 years. And it's like, that is not, you're familiar with them. That doesn't mean you know exactly how the lease works and how to structure it correctly. To your point, yeah, there's essentially the landlord's portion of the build out is firm fixed price as soon as that lease is executed, but the government's is not. So they have this flexibility, which seems rather unfair, but those are the rules of the game, right? So the shell costs and the operating costs, as soon as that lease is executed, are firm fixed price. You can't change those unless the government makes a change, which we've run into many times, obviously. The TI side, they're only going to pay for what they receive. That's kind of a congressional thing that they have to abide by. They can't pay for goods or services they haven't received yet. So their TI and the BSAG, building specific amortized capital, that's their security improvements. Those can change from what's in the lease, and they're only going to pay for what they have. But the landlord side has to be secured up front, like you said. So having folks who know exactly how to do this up front And not only just the broker who understands, hey, I can explain to the landlord team what shell is consisting of, this warm lit shell for an open office area layout, or the operating costs, which don't include taxes or insurance, which needs to be very well understood up front. Those things are frequently missed. So if we don't have, and I always recommend having someone like yourself, a PM and an architect up front on this, because we need to determine what those shell build out requirements are, that warm lit shell for an open office area layout. And it's not readily understood, like you said, by GCs or by PMs or by whoever else might already be on the landlord team, unless they have a specialty in this line of work. So that's something that's always misunderstood on these projects, is what exactly we're just going to give these market rates to the GSA, and maybe we'll just add some cushion in there. That's not how it works. You're not covering what you need to. You're not actually structuring it in compliance with the lease to set it up for success during that post award, the design and construction phase of the project.